I'm very honored to be here and glad, and I'm too far off the mic, and glad to be here. I want to talk to you very briefly, really about three numbers: 150, 50, and 5. I want to draw the connection between those three numbers, and I think there's a common principle behind them. 150 relates to 150 years ago. And the 50 relates to 50 years ago, and the 5 relates to 5 years ago, which is related to your own history. Starting with the 150. 150 years ago, last month, then President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. That one document set in motion change for that particular time. At that time, the United States was really the United States in name only. You could really hardly call them united. They were much rather divided. You could hardly call them states. They were territories in a lot of ways. They were all divided and fighting over that critical issue of slavery. The use of race to subordinate people. The inhumane practices that came along with it. President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, making the statement before the reality that slavery needed to end. And as I'm sure many of you may have seen the new film, the recent film Lincoln, that dramatically, although perhaps not accurately, depicts Lincoln's effort to get the 13th Amendment passed. And that was an important moment. And after the 13th Amendment, although not covered in that film, there's the passage of the 14th Amendment and then the 15th Amendment. And I think these three amendments represent some very important things. The 13th standing for this concept of freedom, that people, all people, should be free. And then the 14th, coming right after it, enshrining these important principles of equal protection and due process into law, said something else very important, that freedom in and of itself is not enough. You need equality too. And then a couple of years later, in 1870, the passage of the 15th Amendment added another message to this, that freedom may not be enough, you need equality too, but equality doesn't come without the power to vote. So you had these important post-civil rights amendments, but they all began and really were started by the act in 1863 of the Emancipation Proclamation. And another important thing about that time, and this post-Civil War Reconstruction time, was the fact that you had these individuals, and they were all men, and they were all white men, who had the power to begin to put this in place. So it sends this powerful message that it's not just about one race or one group, but it's about everyone being able to do their part to make change happen. The second number I want to talk about briefly, 50. Nearly 50 years ago, in 1963, there was the Great March on Washington. It was a march where over 250,000 people came together, came to Washington, because they recognized that even though the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment had passed, even though you had the notion of freedom, equality, and some semblance of the vote had happened, we weren't where we needed to be. Inequality persisted. Problems remained. We were still not one nation. We were divided. Not divided north and south, but divided in many ways in the South, white versus colored, in a variety of other ways. But they came together and recognized that what they had was not enough, where they had been was not where they could be, and what they needed to do was make a difference at that particular point and move America forward again. And so out of that march in Washington, galvanized by a lot of people coming together, inspired a lot of people to engage in change, you had over time the passage of more legislation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 to come, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to come, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 to come. So out of that march, not alone, a range of things going on, but a singular moment, an important moment nearly 50 years ago, inspiring people for change. That brings me to my last number, 5, which many of you may know this number more than I do. 5 represents the launching of this organization. An organization recognizing that the Filipino community needs to come together. come together, develop their own legal defense and educational fund to address issues affecting their community. And I'm glad to be here tonight to salute that. My introduction to the organization, or the early start of the organization, and to many of its members was an issue involving St. Louis nurses. Nurses who were dealing with inappropriate and inhumane conditions. And because they took a stand, they were being charged criminally. They came, Lito Prunier, who was the controller of the Legal Defense Fund at the time when I was there, said this is something you need to be involved with. And you all have been incredibly generous. We spent a lot of time talking. Unfortunately, wasn't able to actually get involved as much as we'd like in the matter. But apparently it sparked something. It sparked a recognition that just as there's an NAACP Legal Defense Fund, General Asian American Legal Defense Fund, and a Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, there needed to be a Philippine Legal Defense Fund. It needed to be an organization that began to address issues that you all have. And I'm glad about that number 5, just as I am about the number 150 and the number 50. And the common theme that connects all of them is this incredible, inexorable commitment to the rule of law. Almost as an idea, but recognizing the idea has power, and the power behind that idea can transform lives. Lincoln, when he sat down to do the Emancipation Proclamation, was just an idea, just something on paper, that he was going to free the slaves. You still had slavery going on. You still had the civil rights, the Civil War going on. But he was committed to that idea, and he recognized that if I say it, that if I could recognize this as a principle that you put into law, that the reality will come. Just as the same as people came together in the March on Washington, that they know they needed civil rights legislation. And they came together and said, if we come together and let people know that this is important, that the power of the idea can be enshrined into law. And similarly, 5 years ago, when you all came together to launch your own organization, recognizing that the power of the idea, the importance of the rule of law can transform lives. So I'm very honored to be here tonight to celebrate this organization, to celebrate the work that you all are doing to help the Filipino community. And I wish you well, and I wish you continued belief in the rule of law and its power to transform lives and the power to make a difference in the world that we live in. Thank you all.